Good day, everyone. On behalf of Director Denise O'Donnell at the Bureau of Justice Assistance, let me welcome you to this webinar on procurement issues with body-worn cameras. My name is Chip Coldren. I'm the Managing Director for Justice Programs at the CNA Institute for Public Research, the Director of Technical Assistance for the Bureau of Justice Assistance's Body-Worn Camera Technical Assistance Program, and I will provide the introduction for today's webinar. Today's webinar focuses on a very important issue for the body-worn camera pilot implementation program sites, procurement. A number of our sites have completed procurement processes for their camera initiatives, especially the enhancement sites, so they have good lessons and experience to impart to us. And many others are in their procurement processes or will soon move in that direction. They could certainly benefit from what others have experienced. So, today's webinar will cover a few topics that we think are very pertinent to body-worn camera procurement. Most importantly, we will hear from several police agencies that have purchased body-worn cameras on the do's and don'ts regarding procurement, and you will have the opportunity to ask questions of them. The site representatives we will hear from today are Deputy Chief Mike Petty from the Fayetteville, North Carolina Police Department and Sergeant Doug Warwick from the Milwaukee Police Department. We thank them both for working with us to put this webinar together and for their participation today. Then we'll hear from Craig Uchida of Justice and Security Strategies. JSS is one of our partners, along with Arizona State University, in the BJA Body-Worn Camera Technical Assistance Program. They have compiled some technical assistance resources around procurement that we think will be helpful to you. Finally, we'll hear from Stephen Fender, policy analyst at BJA, on some basic procurement guidelines from the Bureau. So thanks as well to Craig and Stephen for working on this with us and joining us today. This is the first in a series of webinars sponsored by the Bureau of Justice Assistance and coordinated by CNA for the Body-Worn Camera Technical Assistance Program. We thank the Bureau for its investment in the Body-Worn Camera Grant Program, in the Body-Worn Camera Toolkit, and in a range of technical assistance resources and opportunities for agencies implementing body-worn cameras. The Bureau supports state, county, local, and tribal law enforcement agencies in many, many ways, and we are grateful that they do. Permit me to make a few other comments, and then I'll turn this over to Mike Petty from Fayetteville. This webinar is recorded for the benefit of others who may view it later on our website, so please be mindful when you make your remarks that they're being recorded. There will be opportunities for questions and participation during the webinar, so please make your thoughts and questions known. I can assure you that others will appreciate hearing what you have to say. If you don't get a chance to voice your comments or questions, please use the chat utility to the right of your screen, and we'll do our best to respond to your input. Following the webinar, you will receive a request to evaluate it. Please complete the evaluation, and please give us your honest thoughts and recommendations. And please let us know what other topics you think we should cover on future webinars. I'd also like to thank Dominique Burton and Zoe Thorkeldson at CNA, who do the background technical work to make sure these webinars go smoothly. And I know they would want me to remind everybody that typically these webinars start with everybody on mute. So if you want to say something, you need to get off mute by hitting *6, and then you can get back on the mute function by hitting #6. And I think the important thing to understand that to reduce the background noise, if you're not speaking, please put your phone on mute so we don't hear extraneous noise during the webinar. So thank you for a few moments of your time for those introductory remarks. I'd like to now turn this over to Deputy Chief Petty from Fayetteville, North Carolina. Chief, please tell us about your department's procurement experience.
Well, good afternoon, everybody, and to Chip talking about the background, I apologize if you hear a train go by. Our city council felt they need to build our station right next to the tracks, but hopefully I can get done for the next round. So they asked me to talk to you guys today about do's and don'ts and what we've learned in our procurement process. And just to give you a little background, we are a grant recipient, and we have full deployment at this time. So I'm going to hopefully give you guys some tips and measures on possible things you can avoid. The first thing we recommend is that you beta test as many brands as possible. Most of these companies have a free testing period that they'll allow you to utilize their cameras, and always use everything you can to your benefit. But some of the things we also looked at during that beta testing period was the battery life. We tested for 18 months. We wanted to make sure that these cameras met our expectations and what we envisioned our program to be. We wanted to make sure that the battery life consisted for an entire shift. Their sharing capabilities. If we want to get this video out to other entities, how are we going to do that? Like most agencies, we're trying to get away from the DVD burning business. What type of retention capabilities do they have? Retention, your amounts and your retention are going to affect a lot of things. Number one, your storage, which we'll talk about here shortly. Also, what kind of mounting options do they give to you? Many companies have very limited scope of where you can mount on your uniforms these cameras, and for us that was a major issue. We wanted to give as many options as possible. So we checked the differing companies and what type of options they had. So we really took a look at the proof of concept for each company to see if they would meet our expectations in the usability department, reviewing capabilities, and the sharing of the video. Those were the main functions. And that leads me into the next topic, was measure the body-worn camera's functionality and operability. Again, the different mounting options. As I said, we didn't want chest mounts. But a big thing for us was the charging and uploading of this video. How was that done? We put out to our citizenry and our politicians that if an officer was in uniform, they were going to have a camera mounted to them. So we have a take-home car program, and we quickly realized, and we hadn't expected this, but at some point that officer has to dock that camera and turn it off so it starts uploading. So we potentially would have officers going home with no camera. One of our last officer-involved shootings was involving an officer that was on his way home. So that was a major indicator for us, was how is it uploaded, how is it charged, and I'll talk about that even further. The uploading was a concern. We looked over several options, one of which was could the officer take the cameras home and upload them at their house. Then we got into the concerns of, well, we're going to have to pay for their Wi-Fi service. Was their Wi-Fi service robust enough to handle that? So that option left the table, and we quickly decided to keep everything in-house.
Need help with an issue about trees, sidewalks, graffiti, or other concerns? Hello? Call us.
Hello? Chip, you still there?
Hey, Michael, I'm here. You're okay.
Okay, something came over the line. I apologize. The other functionality and operability was how will the video be monitored. Part of our granting requirement, we did an in-kind match, and we dedicated a full-time recording specialist for that grant. So that was the usability and ease of operation was a big concern to us. One thing we also recommend is that you research the history of that company. When we first started, there was relatively few companies in business that were doing the body cameras. It was still fairly new. But as time has gone on, it seems like everybody is jumping on board, and there's a lot of companies coming out that typically weren't in the body camera business. I know GoPro's in the process now of creating some type of system. So research the company, make sure that they have a technology background, and look at the back-end support. Are they going to be there for you down the road? Because this is, even though it's a huge purchase today, don't look at it like it's today. Look at it for tomorrow. What type of replacement and warranty do they have? Many of these companies, once you buy the camera and walk away, you're done. They don't offer any type of back-end support, so that's an important issue. And one of the things you might look at if you were trying to get a fairly decent deal on these cameras is this company trying to establish a foothold in your state. There are companies out there that will offer discounts to use departments as the test bed, if you will, for individual areas. So check that out and see if that can work into your favor. Evaluate server versus cloud. This was a major issue for us, depending upon whether you have a robust IT department, whether that IT department is in-house, or if you're like us, it's maintained by the city itself. You may have to evaluate whether you want cloud-based or server-based storage. At the time, there was only one company there that offered storage other than in-house, so that was something that we seriously considered. We would rather pay somebody to keep that service, because if you have an in-house bank of servers, who are you going to have to monitor that? Who are you going to keep that system up? So that's something that you may consider, and it really depends upon your relationship with your IT department. Another thing we recommend is you start on your policy now, because as you get through this process, and your policy may end up dictating what type of system you end up buying. So start on your policy now, get everything in place, and again, try not to reinvent the wheel. We recommend that you get full citizen engagement. We partnered with our faith-based community and several activist groups around the area to outline their expectations, see what they were expecting us to perform, and that may dictate your policy, and in turn will dictate what type of camera you buy. Next slide, please. Examine the sharing capabilities. I've already talked to you about that. One thing that I hope everybody considers is that you reach out to your DAs or your prosecutors, touch base with them, make sure that they have buy-in. One of the things we did not realize in the beginning was that a DA or a prosecutor in a particular county or region may have multiple agencies with multiple different types of cameras. So they have all these different systems trying to share data and video with them. So you might want to touch base with them and try to work with them on developing a system and identifying something that works for everybody. Again, examine your redaction capabilities. We don't necessarily recommend that you do any redaction in-house. Most of these camera companies have very low-end software when it comes to that. The average redaction, I believe it's 30 frames per second of video, so you can imagine if you're going frame by frame to redact it, it's going to take an extraordinary amount of time. But for us, it was more of a liability issue. We didn't want to be able to redact, and we don't recommend anybody else doing that. Once you redact something, you now have that capability, and it can be used against you in a court. So we definitely don't recommend that. Again, warranty replacements. What type of service does your company offer? We particularly purchased a camera that offers every 2.5 years, they'll give us a new camera. So on a 5-year contract, we'll have 3 iterations of a camera system. Again, some of these companies, once you buy it, you're done and gone. Know your local procurement laws. Extremely important. We were fortunate enough in North Carolina that we were able to purchase off a cooperative. We used another agency that had an open contract to buy ours at a better rate. There's also sole source capabilities, which I believe are going to be talked about later in this presentation. So I would suggest that you investigate what's available to you in your area or state. Another thing to recommend is if you can combine forces with another agency. If you're a smaller agency and you know somebody close to you is getting ready to buy, then you might be able to work out a deal with that agency to buy in bulk. Bulk always equals usually a discount. But make sure you just use the options available to your state or region. We recommend that you speak to your officers as well. Officers, make sure they have buy into this program. It'll also help you on the policy side to make sure that they're utilizing it like they're supposed to. There are several community activist groups that want to know what will happen if an officer fails to activate their camera. So that will be something that you'll probably have to look at in your policy development. But getting buy-in early can also help you determine what style of camera you're looking to buy. Meeting public expectations versus reality. This was a major issue for us. When you speak to the public, they typically want you to record everything and release all of it. Obviously, if you record everything, that's going to affect things like storage, which we'll talk about here in just a second. But it's extremely difficult to actually meet those expectations versus what you can really do. North Carolina particularly if you use any type of video to evaluate an officer's performance, it's now part of their employee file, and it's not considered public record, so you'll need to check your local employment laws as well. But the storage amount is a major issue. It's extremely expensive. Cameras are cheap by themselves, but you're paying for that storage. Just to give you an example, in North Carolina, or here in Fayetteville, we purchased 300 cameras initially. We have unlimited storage, and our contract for 5 years was $1.2 million. So you really need to look at what your agency or your municipality can afford versus what's expected of you. If you say, I'm going to record everything and keep everything, then that's obviously going to mean you're going to need to seek out some type of unlimited storage, or you can buy enough servers to handle that issue. It'll also affect your retention schedules and how long you're going to retain those items. Do you need backup cameras? This was, as I stated to you earlier, we initially purchased 300 cameras, and as we told our citizenry and our politicians that if a uniformed officer was on duty, they were going to have a camera. Well, as I stated to you earlier, at some point they have to charge them and dock them and upload the video. So we began looking at backups. We were able to contract with the current company, and we did this several ways. We made sure they understood that this was a long-term deal, it was a long-term relationship. We also had other products that this company produces in our inventory, so we used all those things combined to get a deal on not the same type of camera, but a backup camera for our officers. And the reason we did that is we quickly realized that we had detectives that worked off duty as well, and when they worked off duty, they were in uniform, and we wanted to make sure that they were protected. So we ended up buying 200 backup cameras that we used partially. 120 of them are used as backup for patrol, and then the 80 were signed out to the detectives. But we were able to negotiate a deal based off of our total purchase. And the other option there is more of a policy issue. Can citizens opt out? This is going to be something that your individual agencies will have to make a decision on, as to whether or not you feel they should be able to opt out of being recorded. Next slide, please. So do you buy all the bells and whistles? One of the things that we looked at is, obviously, if you get everything, it costs more, but we decided from an agency's perspective that we weren't going to buy everything that offered. These camera companies coming out now, they have 1080p, they have night vision, and for us, at least, it was a decision that we did not want our officers or the cameras to be able to see things that our officers couldn't. So the cameras can actually be so clear and so detailed that they outsee the human eye. So that was something that you need to consider when purchasing. And if you can get something at a reduced quality, more close to the human eye, then obviously that won't be as expensive. And the last thing I wanted to talk to you about was public pressure versus procurement. Many times you're under the gun to buy these cameras, both from the public, maybe your politicians, or even your chiefs. I know for one, our chief pretty much guaranteed cameras by a particular time, and it was a struggle for us to get them there. But one of the things I recommend is that you do your homework on the front end to avoid any hang-ups, so that you can deploy these cameras in a quick nature to satisfy all those entities. But as in always, please stay in contact and consult your VJA analyst for clarification to make sure that you guys are doing everything that you're supposed to do. And with that, I'll open it up to any questions.
Do we have any questions for Mike at this point?
Hi, Chip. Yes, we have two questions that have come in. So the first is, where did your department elect to wear the cameras, and what was the thought process behind that decision?
Well, we started looking at the cameras that were mounted, and most of the companies now are producing cameras where they mount on the chest or somewhere in that region and vicinity. We had concerns that when the officer raised their hand up, if they were pointing a weapon at somebody, the hands would typically block out the view. So we opted to go with a camera that offered multiple mounting options. And our officers now can either mount them on their lapel, they can mount them on their collar, We sell that we purchase some headbands if they want to wear it on a band around their head, and this particular company also manufactures a clip that will mount to a certain style of sunglass. So those are the types of mounting options that we have selected. It gives a better field of view. Obviously, the closer you get it to their eye, they have some that mount a clip on a hat if you wear baseball caps, but the closer you can get it to the eye, the better perspective of the officer you're going to have. You're not going to get exactly what he sees or she sees, but you're going to get a better perception from it. What was the other part of that question?
So we have a second question, or a couple questions we're going to sort of combine into one about redaction and FOIA requests. So question about who is responsible for performing the redaction activities, and then about how many FOIA requests do you find that you're getting on, say, a weekly basis?
We haven't gotten any thus far. The company that we utilize, there's laws on the books now in North Carolina they're trying to pass about the release of video. Right now in North Carolina, any video that's part of an investigation is not public record. Any video that's part of, like I said earlier, is used to evaluate an officer as part of his employee file and is therefore not public record. So we haven't actually had any. The company we contract with does have redaction capabilities, but we purposely purchased this brand so that we can electronically share all of our video with our DA's office, and they also can share all video with the defense for discovery purposes. I hope that answers the question. But
good. Michael, thank you very much. This is Chip. I'd like to ask one question, if I might, or maybe just a clarifying point, which I think is pretty straightforward. But if you purchase the backup cameras like you have, and I've heard at least from one other agency that they've taken that route, that doesn't necessarily increase your storage costs, correct?
No, the number of cameras doesn't increase your storage, just the actual uploading of data. And one of the things I failed to mention was the other reason we decided to go with backup cameras, because these cameras are individually assigned to the officer. The data is programmed into the camera, because we even tried to examine the fact of, well, why can't they just turn them in at night and check them out, kind of like the old days when you checked out radios. But that's not possible, because the cameras, like I said, they're assigned individually. The backups, we had a little bit more leeway. And I also went to mention we've also mounted them on our SWAT team. I know there's a lot of opinions as to whether they should or should not, but as one person poignantly put it, you can go on YouTube and see any type of SWAT entry procedure nowadays. So it's really not anything secret. Of course, we don't videotape the planning phases and the after actions or but the actual entries we do.
Okay. Thank you very much, Michael. Appreciate.
One more question for you, if you got a moment.
Sure. Please do. Yes, go ahead.
In reference to the person that you, or the company that you guys chose, how did you guys address the divorce clause, if you will? A lot of the issues revolving around data being stored in the cloud is the fact of what happens to said data when there is a parting of the ways. And is there a premium being charged for that data dump, if you will? Because most of these cloud services want to say, hey, give me all your data, but when it comes time to say, hey, I want it back, we're going to charge you a premium to do that. Did you have any, or was there any contractual language or dealt with, obviously you guys used another agency's procurement vehicle to acquire this stuff, but was there anything that was addressed within that contract to associate that divorce clause?
Yeah, the contract spells out that the data itself is our property. They're sort of the keepers of it. So if we decide to leave that company and part ways, if you will, we'll still have access to that portion of the data on that storage cloud, if you will. and we can even for a fee we can have it downloaded back to ours, but you can work all that in your contract. Yes, that was a concern. Is you know, everybody seems to be, and rightfully so. There seems to be concerns with the cloud and its operation and how it works, and but I think as long as you get your legal folks involved and they get the right language in there, that it should say something to the effect of that's your property and you have rights to it, even if you separate.
All right.
Great question, sir. Thank you very much. Let's move over to Milwaukee now. I know Doug Warwick is here, and he's ready to offer some of his perspectives and the experiences that his agency had with procurement. So, Doug?
Good afternoon, Doctor, and good afternoon, everyone listening. Didn't have much time to prepare for this, so I'm going to kind of reinforce what Chief Petty from Fayetteville had indicated. Very good information. Largely what I would present would be very, very similar to what the Chief did. In fact, I really have no qualms with it. He did a very good job of presenting some of the issues. I do want to touch and reinforce some of the statements that he did make, however, and kind of tell you a little bit about our procurement process and some of the experiences that we had. We started looking at cameras back in 2013. We did a much shorter duration pilot project. Ours was only 60 days. We looked at 5 different manufacturers. But from that, we got some good information. Unfortunately, at the time, it was just too darn expensive. So a lot of the research we did was put into a file cabinet and put under lock and key until the Ferguson incident happened. Once that occurred, then we pulled everything out, and then we started the RFP process. That's request for proposal. So what we did is I believe it was 7 or 8 different proposals that we had from the manufacturers based on our specifications. From there, we narrowed it down to 3 of the major vendors. We lasted about, once we narrowed down to a single vendor, we were in negotiations for approximately 4 to 6 months. And now we're kind of fast forwarding to about April or May of 2015. Initially, we only thought we had $50,000 to spend on cameras. The mayor contributed an extra 100, so we were looking at about $150,000 to spend on cameras. We were hoping to get 50 to 75 cameras out of that money, but as luck would have it, the mayor became involved in our negotiation process, and suddenly $4.3 million fell on our lap, and that allowed us to take a 50 to 75 camera deployment all the way up to a full deployment of 1,200 cameras. So again, I would reinforce that you definitely do the research on the front end. Like I said, we did most of it a couple years in advance of the RFP process, and then actually moved forward and finished up the policy, kind of added some language more pertinent to what had been happening over the last couple of years. Definitely consult with the IACP, PERF, and also the ACLU. They all have good information. You may not take away all their talking points or all their information, but they're definitely good places to start for your policy. Like the chief said, you'll definitely want to involve those agencies, involve all the community members you can. They'll want to have a say in what you're doing. Again, you don't have to necessarily take away from it, but hear them out. We did pick up some great ideas from not only our local citizen groups, but also some of the national groups that are involved in body cameras. You'll also want to get involved, like I said, the mayor and all your elected officials. Like I said, we were kind of lucky and came across many millions of dollars that would have kind of went to the wayside had we not publicized this very strongly. Not too much in the way of local and federal regulations were a concern for us. This was primarily a project that was funded by the city of Milwaukee. We did have a couple precursors that the chief wanted to work with when we wrote our request for proposal. and that was he wanted all cameras to have a 30-second pre-buffer. What I mean by that would be the previous 30 seconds of video prior to the time the video came on or was activated would be recorded or would be part of that video evidence. And then he also wanted the officers to have a point of view mount option. And that narrowed down the field quite heavily just with those two conditions. But again, do your research on the front end. It'll make the procurement process go by much easier. Definitely be transparent and honest with all your needs. Again, kind of going back to the mayor, we hadn't quite been open as far as what the police department's desires were until the negotiation process. We wish we could have come around on the front end and been a little more transparent in that respect. Don't rush your procurement whatsoever. Slow down. The chief had mentioned the citizen groups kind of pushing. You're going to get a lot of push, especially in your larger urban areas. Slow it down, take your time, make sure you're doing it right the first time so you don't have to come around and make changes and renegotiate your contracts. That being said, I'll take any questions.
Gentlemen, can you hear me?
Yeah.
I can.
This is Robert Looney with the San Antonio Police Department. I wanted to just chime in on something that was said earlier. I didn't have a chance to get in there. On the issue of spare cameras, be careful on how the contract is written, because when our contract was negotiated by our contract folks and written by them, what were supposed to be spare cameras were entered into the contract as full service cameras. So when we receive them, we would be paying the actual licensing and monthly storage fee on them. So we've had to kind of drop back and reassess on that end. And we have a 3% overage written into the contract for spares as far as breakage and things like that. But otherwise, anything that we were going to consider spares, which was going to be about 180 cameras out of 2,200, would have been charged to us even though they sat idle. So just a caution there.
Thank you very much, sir. Appreciate that.
Chip, if I may add, this is Mike Petty again. He's absolutely correct, and I just wanted to let you guys know we negotiate a separate contract for our backups for our spare cameras. So that was definitely an issue we took into account.
Good. Thanks. Any other questions at this point? This has been very interesting. I appreciate the input from everybody. So let's turn it over now.
One other question for Milwaukee.
Please. Go ahead.
Would you be willing, and actually at this point in time I'm in the process of writing an RFP for our agency, would you be willing to share what you guys did for RFP just as a point to review it and see what you guys did?
Absolutely.
That's a great question, sir. And as a matter of fact, I think we could probably provide some other resources along those lines. I'd like to invite Craig Uchida now from JSS to actually talk a little bit about some guidelines and some materials that his group put together just to do this very thing, to help departments put together their RFPs. So Craig, please go ahead.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. I'm on the West Coast, so good morning and good afternoon to all of you. I'm Craig Uchida, as Chip mentioned. I'm the president of Justice and Security Strategies. We're one of the partners in this technical assistance endeavor, and we're also working with the Los Angeles Police Department on evaluating their use of body-worn cameras through a grant from the National Institute of Justice. What I wanted to talk about today is the basic procurement process in terms of requests for proposals. Some of this can also, though, apply to your sole source efforts, and I know Stephen Fender is going to be talking about that. but I think some of this could apply in terms of what you're looking for and how you're going about this. What we've done is put together what we call a generic request for proposal. And that is, it's a template and a model to assist agencies during this process and even before the process actually takes place. We've looked at existing RFPs from other agencies and have tried to put together as much information in the RFP that would be helpful to you in acquiring body-worn cameras. One of the things I will say is that it's not definitive. It's not. It doesn't include everything that you could possibly want, and it doesn't replace clearly any of your state or local requirements or even federal requirements regarding the purchase of body-worn cameras. It's simply a guide. One of the things I wanted to reinforce with you too, and Sergeant Warwick mentioned this and Chief Petty mentioned this too, is that I think you should take your time in doing all of this, and that one of the things you want to do clearly is make sure that you have a fair and objective process that you engage in so that it's all above board. There are no issues that you have with citizens, with city council, with everyone that's applying pressure to you politically. So do take your time in looking at how you're procuring and what you're doing. So next slide, please. So within this generic RFP, and what we've done is we've included 10 separate sections, and there's a number of appendices that I hope can help you in defining what you want and what you need. The RFP will be available on the website, the body-worn camera website for you. It should be made available to you in a Word document so that you can cut and paste as you see fit. And I believe we'll put it up as a PDF as well, just so that you can have a good hard copy of it. As I mentioned, there are 10 sections. The first 3 sections are basically an introduction to the RFP itself, an invitation to apply. There are goals and objectives of the cameras, and there's some general conditions of the agreement that you would want to include within the RFP. When we get to the meat of things, however, I think Section 4, for example, is a key area to look at because it does go into quite a bit of detail about who you want, what you want, and what kind of information you want. As Chief Petty mentioned, the experience of the vendor is really important for you, and as are references. Who have they worked with before? Who can they guide you to, and who can you call and talk with are part of this. We also mentioned things about the qualifications of the staff. Who works with the vendor? What kind of background do they have? And because those obviously are very important to configuring everything and giving you confidence about who you're working with. A third component here, and I'll talk a little bit about this in terms of the appendix as well, is that we put together what we call a selection and assessment tool. And that tool includes different components and different parts of the cameras themselves and what we think you're looking for. So as Chief Petty mentioned, things about battery life. How long, is the battery life? What kind of upload and what kind of storage and what kind of sharing capabilities? All of those things are built into the tool and are also built into a list of things in Section 4. And I think I hope that that can help you both in terms of the kind of research you should be doing in looking for the appropriate vendor, and then when you're have this RFP out, it should help you with the application that you receive, and it should also help you in assessing the applications that you get. That is, you really want to know if they're answering your questions, because that's the critical part about all of this. And so I would think that that tool could help you. One thing, too, that Chief Petty mentioned is to assess the financial stability of the contractor. You really can and should request financial statements from the vendors. You want to find out how stable they are, how long they've been in business, how old, young that business is, and because you don't want this business to go out of business over the next 2 or 3 years that you're working with them. So I think it's important to ask those kinds of questions. Next slide, please. Section 8 also talks about very specific technology information and requirements that you'd want. And I want to mention here, too, that it does include language and a clause about the data ownership. So the question about data ownership, who owns it, et cetera, that is built in both to the RFP, and it should be a requirement for you in your contract. It also asks for basic characteristics of the cameras, technical things, and maintenance and so forth that you want answers to. Section 9 talks a little bit about how you want to evaluate the selection of cameras. We suggest that you look at how easy these cameras are to use, what kind of functionality, et cetera. We also suggest that you engage in a testing period of the cameras. So as Chief Petty mentioned, one of the things that vendors are happy to do is proofs of concept for 30, 60, 90 days, and you should take advantage of that. You should ask to test 2 or 3 or 8, however many cameras you'd like to test over a certain period of time, so that you and your officers become comfortable with that. And you should build that into the RFP, that you state very clearly that there will be a testing period, and there will be an evaluation period where you're going to be looking at these and assessing them accordingly. So I think that's a really critical part, because you start to get buy-in from your officers as well, and you get a real sense of what you're getting and how useful they are. Next slide, please. So the last part of this is the Section 10, which includes a number of different appendices. And one, as I mentioned, includes the selection and assessment tool. The vendor has to fill in blanks about specific aspects of the camera. So, for instance, one of the questions we ask is, how heavy is the camera? What does it weigh? What kind of battery is it? What kind of storage do you offer? What kind of performance should we expect? And also some very specific questions about the video resolution, about the maximum capacity of it, and so forth. So hopefully, because they have to fill out this form, it'll give you a good idea of what they're stating, and then you can look at it and then compare it with other vendors and what they're saying. The other part, too, is that it asks about training. What kind of training do they provide? Who do they provide it to? And other questions about ongoing training as well. The other thing I want to mention in the appendix is that we also put in a spreadsheet for your budget. So in a lot of ways, this follows the guidelines, OJT budgets, where you ask about hardware costs, very specifically about software, very specifically about services. It enables you to add up everything, I hope, fairly easily, and so that's in the appendix. The other things in the appendix include things like just a sheet for references. Who have they done business with before, name, address, things of that nature. And then lastly, there's some just general languages about standard conditions in terms of the contract. So that's really the RFP overall, and like I say, that'll be made available to you on the Volume 1 Camera website. And that's it.
Great, Craig, thank you very much. We have time for a question or two of Craig at this point, and I will let everybody know that the link to that PDF does exist on the Body-worn Camera website, which I will refer you to in a few minutes. But
I would also,
please go ahead.
As a statement, as far as cautionary tales, be cautious of your vendors and looking at their history. With some of the things that we have experienced here, this came more along the lines from our in-car video solutions, is look at the solvability of how patent is that company, because we ran into some issues with some companies that were based in a venture capital type venture, and as soon as it became unprofitable, all the venture capital said, well, we'll take our money and go now, and then the company just went up in air. And the company had been around for quite some time, but they had an issue. That issue cost a ton of money to resolve, and as soon as it became an unprofitable venture, they were gone. So I have a tendency to want to stay away from venture capital type companies. At least that's where their money comes from, if you will.
Yep. Thank you, sir. Let's turn this over to Stephen Fender now. I know Stephen has a few things he wants to go over regarding Justice Department guidelines. Steve?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Chip. And thanks to everybody who's gone so far, the Sergeant and the Deputy Chief, and to Craig. That was great information. And some of these points we touched on so far, I mean, that level of detail and the sort of the thoughtful consideration regarding your procurement is exactly what we're looking for. And I think those sort of cautionary points regarding investigating the background of your vendor, potential vendors, it's just a great tip, and that's certainly something that we would look forward to reviewing during the site visit. Could you go next slide, please? So the most important thing to consider when using Office of Justice Programs funds is to ensure that competition takes place when making your procurement decisions. This can certainly take a number of different forms. There are many ways that this requirement can be met. However, when deciding how you should ensure competition, you should follow your state and procurement guidelines, just as has been mentioned several times so far. And for those agencies that don't have local procedures that require competition, we had Craig just went over a really good resource. We also have a few examples of checklists for completing bids and sort of an overview of the process from a very simple procurement to a much more complex procurement that we expect to see for the larger dollar amount. And that resource is available in the Federal Procurement Guide that we'll link to at the end of this presentation. So for documentation, certainly we've talked about a lot of sort of a lot of specific details is being thoughtful about procurement. The template talks about that. The procurement guide talks about that. So in order to determine compliance, certainly from BJA's perspective, that you need to ensure that all documentation that shows the procurement process is maintained. It sounds like, we're recommending here a lot of thoughtfulness as it relates to procurement, and it's really important that the thinking that has taken place and the steps that took place during procurement is documented and maintained by our grantees for later review. Overall, we expect to see at a minimum regarding procurement, in my mind, there's sort of like three big pieces here. It's what you ask for, or the content or the RFP, making sure not to be too specific because we're writing an RFP to match a particular product, and then what you received, so the vendor response, the documentation that shows what the vendor came back to you with, and then the third piece is what you decided based upon that information and an articulation of ensuring best value. So those are sort of the three pillars that really kind of oversimplifies the process, but from our perspective, remember, we're deferring back to local guidelines, referring to the template, referring to the procurement guide. So these are the things we would look for and would expect to see upon review. I also want to talk a little bit about the GSA schedules for procurement. So for those, many don't know, that's a good resource for using federal funds, grant funds. You can purchase off the GSA schedule. And what they provide, as you see here, I indicated a streamlined process. So procurement still takes place. That's frequently a bit of a concern or confusion, point of confusion for grantees, that it's just a different streamlined process. So depending on the threshold, there's a micro threshold, there's a simplified acquisition threshold, and that's just all related to the dollar amount. So less than $3,000 is the micro threshold, and under $150,000 is the simplified acquisition threshold. So less than $3,000, you can buy off of GSA using their government credit card. Over $3,000, which will likely apply to most of our body camera purchases, but under $150,000, you document procurement following their procedures. You review contracts on the GSA website. You document the decision, how that led to best value, and this allows you to sort of save time on procurement, right? So now at this time, they don't have all of the cameras listed on their schedules. They do have a fair amount. And for more details regarding how to navigate the GSA website, please see the GSAadvantage.gov that I've listed there. And then there's a slightly more robust level of procurement that takes place over the $150,000. And when you send the electronic RFPs to the vendors and receive information back, same process. It's still the same piece that we talked about, what you asked for, what you received, and how you made your decision. So those are all the pieces that we'll be expecting to see at the end of review. And just let me follow up on the point that was made earlier regarding public pressure versus procurement. So this is a pretty common theme we're seeing nationally for agencies that are ready to go to purchase based following sort of public pressure. They're ready to move forward and make their purchase, but it's really important that today you follow the procurement guidelines, your own procurement guidelines, and then check with your federal staff to make sure you're complying because it's going to be worth it in the long run. All right. Okay. Next slide, please. So we talked about ensuring competition. So there's one exception to competition, and that's the non-competitive procurement, also known as sole source. There are 4 circumstances in which the sole source non-competitive procurement can be considered, and they're listed here for you. Most frequently, what we hear from is the items only available for a single source. I do want to address item number 2, the public emergency. That's not going to, typically that would be something like a large-scale disaster during which we would need to get supplies or some other sort of emergency services to a locality, and that would be one of your exceptions. So that's not typically going to apply to just a compressed timeline to meet sort of to get roll cameras out. We wouldn't expect that to sort of fit within number 2. Number 3, that wouldn't apply for most body-worn camera grantees, as this has not been determined to allow for non-competitive proposals as part of the solicitation. And then number 4, as I mentioned here so far, after solicitation of a number of sources, competition is determined to be inadequate. So it's my sense, and we'll certainly be glad to hear from you if you think otherwise, that there's a lot of competition at this time for body cameras, and so that it would be less likely of a possibility you would fall into that category, but we would consider it if you submitted it. So the first, number one is the available from single source is likely to be the one that's been requested so far, it's really important when thinking through the documentation that you sort of align with our financial guide. And on our financial guide on page 65, we have a template for sole source justification. There's 7 bullets there, and for those that have gone through this and are listening, and maybe who have talked to me, certainly are very familiar with these 7 bullets, because these are required that you address each one of these. These include things like a description of the product and service, like an overview, a detailed explanation of why the service why it's necessary to contract non-competitively. This would touch on areas like organizational expertise, management, knowledge of the program, specific characteristics of a camera that may or may not be available from other vendors, etc. And then a statement about contractual coverage, outline of the detailed unique qualities of the contractor, etc. So please take a look at that if you're thinking about moving in that direction. That is an important guide, and all that documentation will need to be filled out in detail and be very thorough about each step. Now, as you see here at the bottom of the slide, indicated that non-competitive proposals that exceed the simplified acquisition threshold must be approved. So that means anything under $150,000 does not have to be approved by BJA. However, all these same guidelines do apply, and we would expect robust documentation of each one of those elements upon review. And so over 150, we'll take a look at them, and we'll take a look. You please document all 7. You submit that to your BJA contact, and we'll go through each one of those and verify a chain of command through our financial office. I would encourage you, if you're considering about submitting a sole source justifications, contacting your BJA representative and sort of talking through these points for them so they're on the same page, because these are quite difficult to go through if you've never done it before, and we'll be glad to provide with some extra information and support to help you through that process. All right, could you go to the next slide? Great. So I mentioned a couple resources, the financial guide and the procurement guide. These 2 resources do a better job of representing the information than I'm ever going to do. Please, if you're thinking about procurement, as you move through that process, as you use our federal funds, please take a look at these pieces, the financial guide and the procurement guide if needed, if your state and local guidelines sort of, in your mind, don't rise to the level of competition. Please look at that for an example. Certainly take a look at the piece Craig talked about for our template, and you can always certainly contact your BJA staff representative for more information. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Chip. Chip, are you there?
Forgive me, I was on mute. I'm back. Stephen, thank you very much for that. I am going to move towards concluding this unless there are any other questions. We're happy to entertain them. And I'd actually like to ask one that occurred to me as I was listening to this. So go back to Mike Petty or Doug Warwick, or anybody else that wants to chime in, but I'm curious about the testing phases that departments go through, because my experience has been that the departments don't always have the infrastructure that they need to do the downloading and uploading. So how does testing work when departments don't have all the infrastructure that's necessary?
Chip, this is Mike Petty. That's a difficult one for me to answer. We're in a situation here where we do have a robust IT department. However, they're external. They're not within the police department. So that was one of the reasons we opted for the outside storage. Not to say that we're not getting along with our IT, but we don't get along with our IT sometimes. But we examined many options. But the thing that overwhelmed us more than anything is if you take an hour's worth of video, that's 1 gigabyte of memory. So when if you have a rather large department, it doesn't take you long to do the math to realize that could quickly add up, especially if you have lengthy retention schedules. I remember there was an agency in Virginia when we were up there for the TTA that said they had, for felony cases, a 65-year retention. I can't imagine how much storage that's going to take in 65 years if they have to retain all their videos from felony investigations. So that was a major factor with the outside storage for us.
Okay.
For Milwaukee, when the vendors came in, most of them had some sort of back-end system that we could put the videos in. And then once the contract or the pilot period was up, we simply moved those videos into a separate storage server within the IT department. So the accessibility to them is a little awkward at best, but again, it's only 60 days worth of video, and we, tell you the truth, we haven't had to access them at this point.
Yep. Okay, so let me just bring this to a conclusion at this point, make a couple closing remarks. Remind everybody that you'll, in very short order, you'll receive an opportunity to evaluate this webinar. I did mention that this is the first webinar that we have held under the Body-Worn Camera Technical Assistance Program, so we're extremely interested in your thoughts about how it went, if the information was pertinent to your needs, if there are other webinars that you think we should be offering. So please pay close attention to that, and please complete that and send it back to us. Let me also just...
This is Mike Rosa.
Yeah, Mike.
Would you mind if I just made one comment? One thing I didn't hear, but I've seen in a couple of sites, this is Mike Rosa of BJA, is conflict of interest. For agencies just venturing into this, recognizing there are multiple people within the agency and possibly within the procurement arm that may have worked with body-worn camera vendors, I would just recommend agencies ask that none of the employees involved in the procurement decision have a contractual or any kind of solid relationship with any particular vendor that could jeopardize your procurement. We've seen a couple of agencies have to back out of procurements because of identified relationships, and these could just be that the officers are trainers for the vendor that they send to other sites, but they're paid. So it's the perception over necessarily the actual opportunity. So just in the procurement sense, do due diligence on identifying conflict of interest, and then move on. You guys, great job on the presentations, though.
Good. Excellent point, Mike. Thank you very much. So I just want to remind everybody that the materials that we talked about here are available on the Body-Worn Camera Technical Assistance website. It's posted here. If you Google BWCTTA.com, you will find it. And there's also an opportunity on that website for you to ask us questions. So if you didn't have time today, or if some questions occur to you in the future, please feel free to contact us, and we will respond as quickly and as completely as we can. Let me again say thanks to Mike Petty and Doug Warwick, Craig Uchida, and Stephen Fender for working with us on putting this webinar together. As Stephen said earlier, the engagement and the question asking and the comments and the experience that have been shared on this website are exactly what we were looking for in this kind of an engagement. So we appreciate everybody's time and everybody's thoughtfulness and everybody's participation today. I'm going to close shop with that, okay? Thanks, everybody.